Listen, we already knew that the superior version of Supergirl is that one music video where the Backstreet Boys are randomly making cameo appearances. Why is that? Because Y2K pop culture, that's why.
So now if you'll excuse me, they're playing my jam.
I'm a Supergirl, and I'm here to save the world.
But this Supergirl? She's not bad.
The Brickens carry the antidote on that person. He has 3 days. You cannot give up on me.
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. I attended an early press screening of Supergirl, the second film in this newest relaunch of yet another era of DC comic book characters being adapted into live action. That is where I got this shirt from. If there's a shirt to be had, I don't mind dressing on theme for a movie review.
It's fashion meets...
Some of the recent iterations of Supergirl include Melissa on the CW series and Sasha from the Flash film, but this newest version sees Millie Alcock stepping into a headlining role after debuting as the character in last summer's Superman film. To start things off, let's go through some of the extra context, since reviewing films like these inevitably brings in a lot of new people who don't know anything about my background or perspective on a franchise film like this. I have not read the comics, so I don't incorporate that source material into my feedback of superhero media. I do have a series on my channel where I will read source material books, and either do a dedicated video about that book before a film adaptation is released, or I will simply incorporate my point of view on the source material book into a review. All of those videos are available in my book versus movie playlist. Now, I was not a fan of the previous Superman film, and in general, I find that the current state of blockbuster filmmaking in Hollywood tends to skew in the negative direction. It's a lot of corporate products and not nearly enough art being made to deliver the expensive spectacle that moviegoers and cinephiles are looking to see when they go to the cinema. Thus, my expectations going into seeing Supergirl were mostly low. I do think that Millie Alcock is a good actress. I saw her in that Netflix series, Sirens, and even though I didn't love some of the choices that were made in the plot, if there's one thing I couldn't fault on that show, it was the acting. All of that being said, upon actually seeing Supergirl, I found more to like about the final result than I expected. It still only lands somewhere in the realm of 3 out of 5 stars, so it's by no means one of my favorite films of the year, or anywhere close to being rated that highly in my overall estimations. But broadly speaking, it felt earnest in its emotional and narrative delivery, more than a lot of these giant IP movies tend to be. Although it suffers from some of the same VFX issues we see with most franchise films nowadays, the commitment to real dramatic stakes and allowing Millie Alcock to dig into reasons behind Kara's pain was refreshing. When I say VFX issues, I'm talking about having these jarring shots where it is so clearly actors standing in front of a green or blue screen, and it's impossible to believe that they are where they're supposed to be. It's inexcusable to have that much money in your budget and have the final result include these ugly shots, when we all know that the VFX artists are more than capable of doing believable work that could fully immerse the audience in the world of the story, but someone up high is, of course, refusing to give the VFX artists the time and money to pay for them to perform the necessary amount of labor that is required to achieve a high-level result. If I rewatch the Lord of the Rings trilogy or James Cameron's Avatar trilogy, I believe what I'm seeing because of how well they've executed all of the visual and practical effects in those works. If you have a high production budget, I will insist on a premium quality for the finished work because you had the resources to do so. Clockable VFX shots are exactly the sort of underperforming aspect that I expect to see in a franchise film like this. Having said that though, Kara's story, her entire journey in this film, and the insight we get into her character was delivered at a higher standard than I anticipated, and that's ultimately what tilts my review in a slightly more favorable direction. I've kept things very vague thus far because I don't know how much or how little of plot spoilers people want to have this early, so those are the broadest ways to talk about the film in a completely spoiler-free section. I do want to transition into a some spoilers section, which isn't necessarily about giving away the entire plot, but presumably a high-profile franchise film like this, based on source material that is already out for the masses, means that there will have been a certain amount of discussion already happening online to do with what the premise of the story is, what has happened to these characters in other versions of their stories, what elements have already been revealed in the film's trailer, and so on and so forth. Thus, let's talk about some spoilers, but we will save some of the more detailed bits for the very end portion of this review. If you've seen the trailer, you will have seen this villain, Krem of the Yellow Hills. His character design, by the way, from the makeup to the costume as well as the performance, he is very well put together. He is a sadistic creep. I was rooting for his downfall from start to finish. Overall, an effective villainous figure to have in a superhero film. In the Supergirl trailer, you will see that Krem has attacked Kara's dog Krypto. This is the inciting incident for her to go after him. Krypto has been poisoned, and Krem is the one who has an antidote. We are in an age where superhero media's oversaturation has hit an all-time high. We have been bombarded for years with stories of these so-called larger-than-life characters who are often almighty, all-powerful. The stakes are supposed to be life and death. The entire world, and by world I mean Earth, because of course it's always Earth, no imagination there. But then you're so often undermining your story's dramatic stakes with these so-called humorous interruptions, except they're not funny, they're just annoying. Supergirl is not a rinse and repeat of every other highly superpowered superhero that has to fight some rinse and repeat villain to save the world, and by the world I mean Earth. She is a mother of a dog, and she needs to go after a bad guy to save that dog. This isn't a detour or a side quest she's taking in between the save the world cases either. She hasn't experienced any of those types of stories yet. Already, it's a great way to start her journey because it's offering something different. Many an audience member might be struggling just to get by in their real lives, living with enormous stress and trauma, but if nothing else, we will be entirely devoted to the well-being of our pets. Now, I don't have a dog myself, but I do have 2 cats, both adopted from animal shelters. Thus, a story like this is a great way to ground a character like hers. Instead of positioning her as some unreachable, unknowable, deity-like figure, she's going through struggles and she loves her dog. If these corporations want to insist on constantly pumping out these superhero movies, you do need to offer the audience more variety, and this is a good way to start. I'm much more interested, though, in seeing Clayface in a couple of months from now, because that looks like perhaps you're actually leaning into more of the horror elements of the story. That's just my judgment, of course, going off of the early teaser, but I'm far more intrigued with that because, among other things, it looks like it's doing something very different and committing to that concept. When you're introduced to this new Supergirl, she's off on another planet which has a red sun. Both Superman and Supergirl get their powers charged by yellow suns, a bit like the one that Earth is orbiting around. Kara is spending her time on a planet with a red sun because the red sun acts as a sort of neutralizer. Her body becomes something closer to how humans are every day on Earth. One of the effects of this is that Kara is able to experience the effects of alcohol. We got a glimpse of that at the end of the Superman film where she comes to Earth, she's drunkenly stumbling around, reuniting with Krypto, whom Superman has been pet-sitting. That reunion was mostly played to comedic effect, but in this Supergirl film, once you get into the story, they go into her origins, which presumably fans of superhero media, either through comics or other adaptations of the comics or both, would already know. Once you see this origin story play out in Kara's memories, you are treated to what amounts to a short film within the latest superhero blockbuster. This short film treats the tragedy and loss of Kara's origin story with all of the weight and dramatic gravitas it should have. If the entire movie had been that tragedy played out in full, I likely would have rated this film higher. And that is simply because of how phenomenally well done it was. Emily Beecham played Kara's mother, and David Krumholtz plays her father. I must say, the film opens with more of this fun, rebellious vibe of Kara, where she's spending much of her time partying, waking up hungover, rinse and repeat, and they had this very 1990s-esque seasoning of grungy rock with a female vocalist while a blonde diva is just doing whatever she wants, and immediately I have the Pavlovian response pop up in my head of, oh, remember when Kat Stratford rolled up in her car to Bad Reputation? And right when I had that thought, David Krumholtz's name popped up in the opening credits, and naturally that universal synchronicity delighted me. Should you be drinking alcohol when you don't have a liver?
Should you be drinking alcohol when you don't have a liver?
What?
Nothing. Nothing.
He was phenomenal in Kara's origin story. Both of her parents were, but I think he had ever so slightly more material to play, and I cannot emphasize enough how impressed I was by that sequence. I wasn't expecting something to really hit me emotionally in a big IP franchise film like this, but that was by far the standout part of the film. Also, I really appreciated the detail of having them actually speak to each other in a language that was not English. If nothing else, perhaps a mainstream film like this, having this phenomenal, meaningful sequence that happens in another language with subtitles will start to chip away at a certain ugly bias amongst some folks in the larger movie viewing audience that is keeping them from engaging with art that exists in other languages. The secondary lead of the story is a young girl named Ruthie. This is a bit of a spoiler, but it's also the inciting incident for her character, and I believe the actress has spoken about this in interviews, so maybe it's not that much of a spoiler. It's difficult to talk about anything involving her character in a review of the film without mentioning this detail. It's the opening of the entire film. Her family is killed by Krem, and as a result of this, she goes on a vengeance quest against him. If I had seen this film when I was a child, I would have undoubtedly looked up to both of these characters for pursuing vengeance against a sadistic villain for what he did to your family, be they people or your dog. The story strikes a nice balance for Ruthie, where on the one hand, she has plenty of agency as a character to make her own choices in pursuing this vengeance quest, but also understanding the character's limitations based on her age, the specificity of which skills she has or lacks. If she could do everything by herself, there would be no need for her to have anyone else on this journey with her, that person being Kara, of course. There are also some interesting ideological differences in Kara and Ruthie's perspectives and experiences in how they are approaching more or less the same thing, which is to go after Krem. It gives them a little bit more dimension in their relationship and how they interact with one another on this quest. The character work and emotional layers for these two as individuals and as reluctant possible friends is definitely one of the film's assets. Whenever we get to an inevitable action sequence, the bigger the scale of the action, the more ambivalent I became. When we were earlier on in the film and Kara had her powers suppressed by the red sun, I actually preferred those action sequences because you couldn't just rely on putting the actress into wire work that's placed on top of mediocre green screen work and other VFX. It's a lot more believable and dynamic to watch when you can really see Millie or a stunt performer doing fight choreography on the ground. It also doesn't help my impression of this viewing experience that shortly before my Supergirl screening, I had watched The Furious, which is an Asian action film. It's a bit of a pan-Asian collaboration, really. You have a Japanese director, and you've got actors whose ethnic backgrounds range across a number of things, including Chinese, Indonesian, Thai, Vietnamese. All of that to say, the action in that was so impressive, high octane, really. And it was about showcasing the marvel and spectacle of what trained martial artists can do when you give them really elaborate fight choreography compared to these giant superhero franchise films where the mileage of the quality of action varies quite a bit depending on the film and depending on the specific action sequence. I want to continue my point here, but that will involve moving into the full spoilers section because I want to be even more specific in making my point here. So, this is your chance to click off. There is one action sequence where Kara is up against a few foes, and they are pushing one another within a somewhat confined space, and they have teleportation devices, so they're fighting each other, but also teleporting all over this contained space. And that felt like it was a more engaging way to be imaginative with how to come up with another method of delivering action for the audience. I was pleasantly surprised when seeing it play out. On the one hand, there is a certain catharsis that comes with Kara finally having these moments of having her powers fully charged so she can fight with full strength, because those instances are payoff for all of the struggles she's had to go through to get to that point. But on the other hand, if we're talking purely about the entertainment value of the action and the level of artistry, the visual presentation of that action, it was just fine. There's nothing about those bigger action sequences that inspired a level of awe that would make me insist to people I know in real life or to viewers who watch my reviews on YouTube, oh, well, you won't believe your eyes when you see this action sequence. It was fine. But I was more invested and drawn in by the character material. What I wasn't drawn in by were the appearances from two characters, Superman and Lobo. If you enjoyed last summer's Superman, his appearances presumably are not going to bother you, and that's perfectly fine. But it wasn't just the fact that he appears in the film here and there. There was one instance of him being included that I found to be especially egregious because Kara is in a very bad state. She's not doing well, we're worried about her well-being, and then she has this memory or a dream of how she arrived on Earth and met her cousin Superman for the first time, and he's so unbearably annoying in this scene. They really try to lean into making it a comedic family reunion, which was incredibly jarring to watch because we were in the middle of genuine dramatic stakes for Kara. She is not doing well. And where her flashbacks are concerned, the last time we saw something of her backstory, it was this incredibly moving, impactful story about the demise of Krypton, her parents giving her the best life that they could, only for us to see the loss of Kara's innocence, her home, and the only family she's ever known. For the continuation of that to be something where the audience is subjected to this annoying, unfunny family reunion or family meet for the first time, it was so unwelcome.
I don't speak Kryptonian. I didn't ever... Shoot. I wasn't raised there, so... I wasn't raised there. Why am I talking louder?
Stop talking, Henry. Stop. Stop talking.
As for Lobo, again, my feedback for this is for people who are not already familiar with the characters from the comics. I don't know anything about this man other than what I was shown in this film. He was tonally disruptive. It's just more of the same loud, obnoxious nonsense that he did in the Minecraft movie, which I only recently saw for the first time on HBO Max. Call that viewing experience symptomatic of a misplaced morbid curiosity.
Oh! No! 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 No!
The way that Lobo comes across in this film, when you don't have any context of source material lore, he feels like a character that is simply being included for the sake of trying to check a box to make this into a 4-quadrant film. The problem is that he's not meaningfully integrated in the story in such a way that makes him worth caring about. He's like this intrusive comedic relief character, but without being funny.
Aren't you the ditz from that dive bar?
Funny. That's what I've been calling you.
Touche.
I got more entertainment from that interview clip of Jason Momoa being delighted by Lobo being pronounced with an Australian accent than I did anything of him in the film.
Sorry, I have to ask him the question again because you got me when he said Lobo. Say Lobo again. When you guys go like ner, you said Lobo, and I was like Lobo with an on it, and you fucking got me.
Has Millie never said that? I guess Millie.
No, she doesn't. No, she doesn't. I was just trying to keep it together. I apologize. Your question. Do not dock her for that time.
So Lobo, is that how you say it? Lobo. We did it.
Let's just talk about this for a second. No, how do you say Lobo? How do you say it?
Lobo.
From Macro for the show. I'll be with you tomorrow. I better go.
If he's one of your favorite characters from the comics, it's perfectly reasonable and understandable that you could probably find some other quality in him in this film to connect to. For uninitiated viewers, he just looks like a Gene Simmons impersonator with the same obnoxious energy of the Minecraft movie, and that did absolutely nothing positive for me. That being said, I did not have any noteworthy impression or connection to Supergirl when she made her cameo appearance at the end of Superman. But now, in her solo film, she has so much more range, dimension, and depth as a character. I don't know if there are plans to do a solo Lobo film, but if that were to ever happen, once they were to make him the focal point of a story and you could build the story and world around him, I could easily see him transforming into someone that's more easy to engage with. If you like that kind of irritating humor in your franchise blockbusters, think about the annoying energy of the so-called comedic interruptions in MCU films, or the brash delivery of dialogue in The Boys television series, but repackage that to be a very light PG-13. That's basically how Lobo is in this film, so you will probably enjoy him. This is something very subjective, I don't deny that. If Supergirl as a film had to have anything lighter in tone, something more comedic or fun, everything we saw in Kara's lighter moments was already enough. She's dancing around and listening to her music on her ship. She's being verbally snappy to the bar patron who's trying to steal Ruthie's sword. Those things did not feel out of place for the film and the general tone of this story because when you have that full context of this grandiose tragedy, in her origin story, and everything clicks into place with why she's self-medicating, why she's wallowing, and in many ways, if she's having a snarky, quippy moment, you can see that it's another defense mechanism. As a viewer who has grown increasingly skeptical about today's Hollywood blockbusters, overall, I would say this felt like a perfectly fine blockbuster, above average, but only just. I've seen far worse superhero films than this, though. Millie Alcock and Eve Ridley were excellent. I enjoyed seeing them take out a bunch of creeps who were trafficking girls and women. That last bit of them being back on the ground in the final climactic bits of action felt ever so slightly reminiscent of Mad Max Fury Road, with all of the vehicles and the brides finally being out and free, though Mad Max Fury Road was much better at being believably immersive, visually speaking, seeing as how they did a lot more practical work in the action sequences. Having said that, Mad Max Fury Road is very much an R-rated action film, so if you want something for your younger family members to watch, this can be the warm-up film until they're old enough to indulge in the incredible spectacle that is George Miller's Mad Max Fury Road.